night. The night my father handed my brother the keys to everything we had built together, he did it with a champagne glass in his hand and a smile on his face. And I was standing 6 feet away, wearing the dress I bought specifically because I wanted him to be proud of me. I want you to hold that image for a second, not because I need your sympathy, but because I need you to understand exactly how far I had fallen before I finally stopped falling. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old, and for the past 8 years, I gave everything I had to my father's architecture firm, Wilson & Associates. I worked nights when my friends were at bars. I skipped vacations. I canceled dates. I once spent a Christmas Eve finishing a commercial proposal because my father said the client couldn't wait. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself he would see it eventually. I told myself that the kind of man who built something from nothing with his own hands would, at some point, recognize the same quality in his daughter. I was wrong about that. And I think, somewhere deep down, I always knew I was wrong. But hope is a strange thing. It doesn't ask your permission. It just keeps growing back, like a weed in a garden you keep forgetting to tend. My brother's name is Ryan. He is 3 years older than me and has worked at the firm for 5 of those years, 3 years less than I have. Ryan is charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly and without any of the work that should accompany it. He plays golf with clients. He remembers birthdays. He has a firm handshake and a confident laugh, and he once took credit for a mixed-use development proposal I had spent 4 months on. And when I brought it up to my father looked at me and said, "Claire, don't be petty. Ryan presented it. That's what matters. That was 2 years ago. I should have left then. I didn't." The dinner was held at the Meridian, a private event space in downtown Denver that my father had rented for what he was calling his transition celebration. He wasn't fully retiring. He was stepping back from day-to-day operations and handing the firm over to what he called the next generation of leadership. Everyone in the company had been invited, clients too. There were maybe 80 people in that room, under soft lighting with catered food and an open bar and a string quartet that played in the corner like we were all in a movie about old money. My mother was there, seated near the front. She smiled at me when I walked in, the way she always smiled, warm, a little tired, careful. My mother is a woman who learned very early in her marriage that the path of least resistance was the only path worth walking. I never blamed her for it. I understood it, but I had spent years quietly wishing she would choose a different road, just once. I found my seat at the table marked with my name. It was not near the front. Ryan's seat was near the front. I told myself it didn't mean anything. The evening moved the way these evenings do. Slowly, pleasantly, with small talk that cost nothing and meant less. I spoke with Marcus, our lead structural engineer, who told me the Henderson project had come in under budget because of the revised load calculations I had submitted in February. I spoke with Patricia from accounting, who squeezed my arm and said, "You're the reason this place still runs, honey." I laughed and said something modest and moved on, because that was what I always did. I collected small kindnesses from people who were not my father, and I stored them somewhere private, and I told myself they were enough. My father stood up to speak at 8 o'clock. He was dressed well. He always dressed well. He is the kind of man who believes that appearance is a form of argument, and that if you look like someone worth listening to, people will listen. He tapped his glass and the room quieted, and he smiled at everyone in that particular way he has. Wide, deliberate, performing gratitude while keeping something in reserve. He talked about the firm's history. He talked about the early years, the lean years, the years he almost lost everything and then didn't. He talked about growth and legacy and what it meant to build something that would outlast you. He was a good speaker. He always had been. I had his voice in my head from childhood, low and measured and certain, the voice of someone who had decided long ago that he would not be wrong about things. Then he talked about Ryan. He said Ryan had the instincts of a true leader. He said Ryan understood people, clients, partners, the community, in a way that was rare and essential. He said the firm needed someone at the helm who could carry its vision forward with confidence and charisma. He said he was proud. He said he was certain. He announced that Ryan would be taking over as managing principal effective the 1st of next month. The room applauded. I sat very still. I had known, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this was likely. I had known it the way you know. A storm is coming before it arrives. You can feel it in the pressure of the air, in the particular quality of the quiet. But knowing and experiencing are two entirely different things. The knowing keeps you upright. The experiencing takes your legs out. Ryan stood up. He buttoned his jacket and he smiled the way he always smiled. Easy, practiced, the smile of someone who had never once doubted that the room would be on his side. He thanked my father. He thanked the team. He made a joke that landed and everyone laughed. He did not mention me. My father did not mention me. 80 people in that room, 8 years of my life in that firm, and I with a name card at a table in the middle of the room, present enough to be furniture, invisible enough to be forgotten. I picked up my water glass and I took a slow sip and I looked at the tablecloth and I thought, okay, this is what it is. And then my father said one more thing. He said, with his glass still raised and his smile still in place, and as for the rest of our team, we'll be looking at restructuring some roles in the coming weeks. Claire, I know change can be hard, but I think you'll find this transition opens up some interesting opportunities for you, somewhere that might be a better fit. 80 people heard that. My mother's face, from 3 tables away, went very carefully blank. Ryan looked at his shoes. I looked at my father. He was already moving on, already gesturing towards someone near the back, already finished with me. There is a particular kind of humiliation that only a parent can deliver. It is not like the humiliation of a stranger or a rival or an enemy. It has weight to it. It carries history. It lands in places that other people's words cannot reach because it has a key. It was made from everything you ever believed about yourself as a child, all those early years when your parents' opinion was the only opinion that existed, when their voice was the voice of the entire world. When your father diminishes you in public, he is not just embarrassing you in front of a room of colleagues. He is reaching back through time and taking something from the child you used to be. I sat with that for about 90 seconds. Then a chair scraped back near the side of the room. I did not immediately see who stood up. I heard the sound before I saw the person. The quiet, deliberate sound of someone choosing to make themselves heard. Then I saw him. His name was David Holt. He was the firm's outside legal counsel, a quiet man in his mid-50s who had worked with my father for over a decade. He was not a man who spoke at parties. He was not a man who inserted himself into moments that didn't require him. He had a file folder in his hand that I had not noticed him carrying before. He said, "Gerald, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think there are a few things the room should know before this transition is finalized." My father's smile stayed on his face for a moment longer than it should have. "David, this isn't really the time." "With respect," David said, and the way he said it made clear that respect was present but not dominant. "I think it is." The room had gone the particular kind of quiet that happens when people sense they are about to witness something they will talk about for years. David opened the folder. He was methodical about it. He did not rush. He explained, in the calm, measured language of a man who has spent his career making complex things clear, that he had been asked by my father's own request 8 months ago to conduct a full operational audit of the firm in preparation for the leadership transition. The purpose of the audit was to ensure that whoever took over would have a clean and accurate picture of the firm's standing. He said the audit had turned up some findings that he had a legal and professional obligation to disclose. He said that over the past 3 years there had been a pattern of financial irregularities tied to several client development accounts, duplicate billing, inflated vendor invoices, small amounts individually, significant amounts cumulatively, significant amounts cumulatively. The kind of thing that doesn't show up in a casual review but reveals itself when you look carefully at the threading between accounts. He said the accounts in question were all managed under the same internal authorization. He said that authorization belonged to Ryan. The room did not make a sound. Ryan's face, which had been carrying that easy smile, had gone somewhere else entirely. My father set down his champagne glass. David continued. He said that alongside the irregularities, the audit had also produced a comprehensive performance analysis of the firm's project outcomes over the past 5 years. Revenue growth, client retention, error rates, on-time delivery, profit margin by project type. He said he wanted to share one finding in particular. He said that the firm's most profitable project division, the one with the highest client retention rate and the lowest error margin, was the commercial development division. He said that division had been restructured and rebuilt from the ground up starting 6 years ago. He said the restructuring had resulted in a 43% increase in revenue for that division over 5 years. He said that division was led entirely by me. He said my name clearly in a room of 80 people and he let it land. I had not cried yet. I had not moved. I was sitting at my table in the middle of the room in the dress I had bought because I wanted my father to be proud of me, and I was listening to a man I had exchanged maybe 40 words with in 8 years tell a room full of people what I had actually done with my time here. My father was looking at David. Then he looked at Ryan. Ryan was not looking at anyone. My mother stood up. I did not see it coming. I do not think anyone did. My mother is not a woman who stands up in rooms. She is a woman who sits in rooms, who moves through the world with a particular careful grace that comes from years of making herself small enough to fit the space she was given. But she stood up, and when she spoke, her voice was steady in a way I had never heard from her before. Not loud, not angry, but absolutely, entirely certain. She said, "Gerald, I have been quiet for a very long time. I am not going to be quiet about this." She looked at my father the way you look at someone when you have decided, finally, that you are no longer afraid of what they think of you. She said, "Our daughter has carried this firm on her back for 8 years. Everyone in this room knows it. You know it. And what you just did, what you said about her in front of all of these people, I will not stand here and let that be the last word." My father said her name, just her name. The way he always said it when he wanted her to stop. She did not stop. She said, she deserved better than this. From this company, from her brother, and from you. Then she sat back down. The string quartet had stopped playing at some point. I don't know when. The room was completely silent. David Holt closed his folder. He said quietly that the audit documentation would be made available to all board members and that he would be recommending a formal review of the financial irregularities before any leadership transition was finalized. He said this was not personal. He said this was simply what the evidence required. Then he sat down too. My father did not speak for a long moment. He looked around the room, at David, at my mother, at Ryan, at me. And for the first time in my memory, he looked like a man who had run out of room to stand on. Ryan left the dinner early. He walked out without speaking to anyone, and I watched him go, and I felt something that surprised me. Not triumph, exactly. Not satisfaction. Something quieter than that. Something that felt, strangely, like grief. He was still my brother. He had still chosen to be this. Both of those things were true at once, and I didn't know what to do with them, so I just let them sit. I stayed. The evening didn't end dramatically. It unraveled the way these things do. People finishing their plates, conversations starting up again in low, careful tones, a gradual dissolving of the formal event into something smaller and more human. Several colleagues came to find me at my table. Marcus shook my hand and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. Patricia cried a little and told me she had known for years. A junior architect named Josh, who had only been with the firm for 18 months, said, "I just want you to know, you're the reason I took this job. I heard how you ran your division and I wanted to work somewhere like that." I thanked him. I meant it. My father found me near the end of the night when most people had gone. He looked older than he had at the start of the evening, which I knew wasn't really possible, but grief and accountability have a way of aging a person in real time. He stood in front of me and he didn't say the things I had spent years imagining he might someday say. He didn't apologize in the clean, complete way that would have made the story tidy. He said he hadn't realized the extent of Ryan's situation. He said he had perhaps not given my contributions the recognition they deserved. He said these things in the careful, qualified language of a man who is sorry but has not yet fully arrived at sorry. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "I know, Dad." Not because it was enough. It wasn't enough, but because I had spent 8 years waiting for him to see me, and I understood now that the waiting itself had been the problem. Not the waiting for him, but the waiting in general. The belief that my value existed somewhere outside of myself, in his eyes, or my brother's acknowledgement or a title on a door, rather than in the actual work I had done, the actual people I had helped, the actual results I had produced. I no longer needed him to hand me anything. 3 weeks after that dinner, the board completed its review. The financial irregularities were confirmed. Ryan resigned before formal proceedings could begin. My father stepped back from operations as planned, though the circumstances were different from what he had imagined. The board asked me to step into the managing principal role on an interim basis while they conducted a formal search. The interim became permanent 4 months later. The day I moved into the corner office, I sat down at the desk and I looked out the window at downtown Denver and I thought about the Christmas Eve I had spent finishing a proposal because my father said the client couldn't wait. I thought about all the nights, all the proposals, all the times I had been in a room and felt like a piece of furniture. And then I thought about David Holt standing up in a room of 80 people with a file folder in his hand, methodical and unhurried, and I thought about my mother's voice, steady in a way I had never heard it before, and I thought about Josh, 18 months into his career, saying he came here because of how I ran my division. I had built something worth protecting. I just hadn't been the one protecting it. I called my mother that night. We talked for 2 hours. It was the longest conversation we had ever had. She told me things about her own years in that marriage, her own choices, the math she had done, and the things she had given up to make it balance. She cried a little. I cried a little. At the end, she said, "I should have stood up sooner." I said, "You stood up when it mattered." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "So did you. You just did it quietly, for 8 years, where nobody could see. That counts, Claire. That counts just as much." I think about that a lot. The work you do in the dark, the standards you hold when no one is watching, the integrity you maintain in the small decisions that nobody applauds. That is not invisible. It accumulates, it builds a record. And eventually, one evening in a room with 80 witnesses, the record speaks for itself. I measure my worth differently now, not by what my father says or doesn't say, not by titles or announcements or who gets the seat near the front, by what I actually build, by the people who grow under my leadership, by the projects that come in clean and on time, by the junior architects who take jobs here because they heard it was a place worth working. That's the only ledger that matters. And for the first time in 8 years, when I look at that ledger, I am not afraid of what I'll find.